Hi, my name's Alice, and I'm launching Sky Rebellion as an umbrella movement to counter the expansion of the aviation industry in the UK. We currently have 21 airport expansions on the table during the middle of a climate and ecological emergency. We've got biodiversity loss of 200 species a day, and we're thinking of pumping out something like 47 megatons of CO2 into the atmosphere as a conservative estimate from airport expansions. That's on top of everything else we're already doing. So I'm launching Sky Rebellion as a joined up umbrella movement to facilitate campaigning on this front in the UK. So there are loads of disparate groups currently campaigning, but there's no UK laws in place properly to account for these emissions. Each individual airport expansion is campaigned on a one-to-one basis, and to try and lobby local councils and then government to refuse it. But there's no overall joined up plan for this. So I want to bring this issue to everyone's attention so we can unite on this front and have some kind of proper plan for dealing with this issue. I'm here today with Paralympian turned activist James Brown and pilot turned activist Todd Smith to see what they think and why they chose to sacrifice their careers in order to turn into activists and spokespeople on this matter. James, can I turn to you first and ask you why you did what you did and what you think about the aviation industry in the UK?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. I just want to check, am I unmuted and audible? All good?
Good. You're audible.
Yay. Yeah, I'm visually impaired Paralympian. I've done sport most of my life, really, from the age of 16 until the age of 52. And all of that time, I was kind of in and out of sort of, World Championship, Paralympics or level sport in actually 7 different disciplines: cross-country skiing, swimming, triathlon, running, cycling on the track, on the road, and actually I've been a guide runner for a totally blind athlete as well at World Championship level. And I'm bringing that up because that's part of the backstory. It's part of my core values, what matters to me, what gets me out of bed in the morning, and making a difference to others is far more important than actually achieving something for myself. So that's kind of what's driving me as an activist as well. This is about trying to create a better future for my own kids and for everybody else's kids and the generations to follow. So it was my daughter, who's also called Alice, who woke me up to the reality of the climate and ecological crisis a couple of years back, just before the declaration of rebellion, in fact. And I was giving a talk here at Exeter University at the engineering department about social enterprise, which is my thing. Alice came to help me with the slides and, just the practicalities of the day and getting around. But we met for coffee beforehand, and I knew she wasn't right. And we sat down and she just burst into tears. And I said, "What's wrong, Alice?" She said, "Dad, you have to pay attention to this. This is bloody serious shit that's going on." I thought it was just her hobby. I thought, oh yeah, she's into wildlife, and isn't that lovely and great? She's got an interest and she's doing her geography and environment degree. But my God, once she told me the truth, I just thought, where do I go? Where do I sign up, Alice? What do I do? So I was involved in the very first action on the bridges in London, and it's gone from there, really. So yeah, haven't looked back.
Thank you, James. And Todd, can I ask you why you did what you did as well?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alice. So I guess, like, similar to James, really, I just came to the point where, I think COVID was the final straw for me. I was flying commercially for Thomas Cook Airlines, and basically having had my medical revoked partly due to a diagnosis of an illness called Lyme disease, which became much more prevalent in the UK due to our milder winters and our warmer summers. I saw the rise of Extinction Rebellion happening, and I wasn't environmentally aware at all, and I quite quickly became very conscious that my chosen career path was a huge part of the problem. And yeah, I wanted to come out and join the movement, but at the same time I had all these conflicts around, you know, being accepted by my colleagues, and, you know, having to have an airside pass to you know, go airside at airports, and, you know, the implications of becoming an activist. And you know, I toiled with these emotions for some time, but yeah, eventually when COVID really struck at the beginning of 2020, yeah, I made the decision that I had to come out and to add another voice to the movement, really. And yeah, I haven't really looked back from there. You know, I think COVID really exposed our human vulnerabilities, and you know, I think it's really important for workers in heavy carbon industries to be able to add their voice. You know, we've seen Doctors for Extinction Rebellion, and there's people from all walks of life. And yeah, so I, you know, once I understood the science, you know, how could I really, you know, even contemplate just continuing to, how could I sit on the runway, you know, increase the thrust levels of that jet, and knowing that I might burn 18 tons of kerosene just on a flight down to the Canary Islands, for instance. And most of the people on board that aircraft, you know, wouldn't have any idea of the damage that it was doing. Like, flying is the most energy intensive activity per hour, you know, a human can embark on. And yeah, I eventually made the decision that I can no longer return to flying passenger jets. You know, I grew up in a working class family. It took me 7 years to become a pilot off the back of the 2008 recession. You know, I was only 3 years in the industry. I'm still in almost £100,000 worth of debt to my family, and you know, I'm paying them back slowly. But you know, I just have to, I think part of my journey as well is that turning vegan, and like trying to align my actions with my morals, and you know, what I get from being an activist is as James mentioned, that sense of community and meaning and purpose. So yeah, that's where I'm at now. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I just know that I want to be a part of the solution. So yeah.
Thank you. And I think I feel very much the same as both of you. And 20 years ago, I did think things were changing at that time, but now, but they just didn't. And I felt powerless all that time to do anything about it until XR came along. And I think I can never turn back now, because I've got a 16-year-old daughter, and I don't know whether to tell her to go to university or not, or whether it's a little bit pointless and she may as well get a house on top of a hill and a good immune system. So this is the only thing I can leave there. Money is pointless to me. Everything else that I could have left her would be pointless, and so this is it, really. So yes. So there's a lot of things to talk about here. We can talk about the harm that flying does. We can talk about the privilege of flying, in that only 17% of the world ever get on a plane. And flying by itself could push us over the Paris Climate Agreement, the emissions from flying. And that's a conservative estimate, because actually flying, emissions from aircraft actually produce a much more significant effect than just carbon dioxide emissions as they would at ground level. They produce particulates, and they have an effect in the upper atmosphere of radiative forcing, which increases their harm factor by about 1.7% on top of what you would normally count in CO2 emissions. So we can talk about the harm that air travel does, the equality aspect of air travel, and then I want to move on to the extent. I don't think people realise the extent of how many airports in the UK are wishing to currently expand. And that's all on an individual basis. There's no joined up plan for the expansion. It's just individual investment companies or councils that own airports wishing to expand and pushing through their planning applications in the absence of any coherent policy. So that's another factor in UK. So, Todd, what do you think?
Over to James first. And can I just say, like, before we go into like the stats and all like the you know, the reasons why we shouldn't have, you know, make this case for aviation growth. You know, James was like a huge inspiration in my awakening, if you like, you know, seeing the courage of him taking the action at London City. And yeah, I don't know if you'd just like to speak a bit about that action in particular, James, like the emotions and what led you to ending up on top of an aircraft at London City Airport. Because I know that even having spoken to pilots, you know, that are based out of Southend and flew into City regularly, you know, that sent shockwaves through the industry, and it touched the hearts of so many people. You know, someone was explaining to me recently how you know, they could just see your vulnerability, and you're just you know, an ordinary guy, and you understand this stuff, and it compels people to really understand why people are going to such lengths. So yeah, over to you, mate.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Todd. Some of that stuff I didn't know. First time I'm hearing this, although I have been contacted by a number of people who have said, you know, that they have stopped flying as a result of my action, which of course is wonderful. I just want to say before I go on, though, I did have my hand up just a minute ago, and what I just wanted to say to Alice is, thank goodness, you know, thank you for what you're doing. I didn't realize there was no coordinated strategy for airport expansion in this country, and I didn't really realize there was no coordinated strategy against it either. It appears that that's what you're putting together with Sky Rebellion, and I love the idea, I love the concept. I was going to say, I hope it's got wings, but I hope it's got legs. But yeah, back to your question, Todd. Thank you. What was going through my mind? I've been thinking quite a lot about values and principles in the run-up to this talk, and I've already mentioned, you know, my core values around my sport, and you know, making a difference to others is actually what floats my boat. And you know, I know I run a charity and other social enterprises very much focused on changing the lives of or creating opportunities for those who are most vulnerable in our society. And I'm talking about people who are principally wheelchair users who can't use the bathroom on their own. So this, one of the services I run is a mobile toilet and changing facility called the Mobiloo, and it means with the Mobiloo that those who require high specification bathroom facilities like a hoist to lift them from the wheelchair or an adult sized changing bed, or lots of space, you know, that's all available in the back of these custom vans that we build and hire out to event organizers. So yeah, that's sort of my work life, if you like. But the other things that are really important to me are you know, not just making a difference, but you know, fairness and equality, but also challenge. And innovation, actually. So I would say those are, you know, those are the four things that kind of describe me in a way, and my attitude to life. And I felt that the action on that day was a demonstration of all of those core values, especially sort of the innovation and the challenge. So what was going through my mind as I was contemplating my action was, you know, let's do something different. Let's do something that will capture attention. And yes, it required a bit of bravery, but the point is that we all have to be brave. We all have to be brave and innovative, and we have to think outside the box. If we're going to make a difference, if we're going to really mitigate against the worst effects of the climate and ecological emergency for the future of our kids, we're going to have to really be bloody brave. We're going to have to think differently, and we're going to have to be prepared to do stuff that we haven't done before, and maybe that nobody else has done before. So the innovation is there, the making a difference to others is there, and this has to be done fairly. You know, the fact that you know, 1% of people take 50% of flights, that's not fair. Nowhere near it. Like, that's bonkers. That's, I can't, you know, maybe there are other things in the world that are also as unfairly distributed, maybe like the ownership of diamonds or, you know, fine art or something like that. but they're hardly the necessaries of life, you know. And people will say, oh yeah, don't stop me flying, I need to fly, I need my holidays. You know, I'm not going to argue with them, but I think if we were to ask them to put up a list of the necessaries of life, what is actually needed for them and their families to get by, you know, flying is going to be pretty low on that list. And it's just horrific that we have this stat, you know, 1% taking 50% of flights. So that was really what inspired me, what motivated me, and just the kind of the environment around City Airport, where, you know, it's a deprived area. The housing around there isn't great, and we just kind of plunked this big wealthy person's airport right in the middle of that community. And the only benefit that most people in that area get from being there is disruption from the planes, and that's our, you know, I say benefit in inverted commas there. So the thing that was going through my mind was, this is what I can do. And, you know, that's a big message from me, is all about diversity. You know, we can all do different things. People after that said, you're a hero. I go, no, I'm not. Like, because of my sport, I've flown far too many times. I seriously regret it, but I do have an intimate familiarity with the doorway of airplanes because I've been on far too many of them. So, you know, I did what I could do. I knew that I would be taken out to the plane by a member of ground crew because I was visually impaired, and I knew that the opportunity would present itself for me to be at the doorway on my own, and it was. But, you know, the heroes to me are the guys in the tunnels right now. The heroes to me are the people who will go out and, you know, lie in the streets, in the dark, in the rain, you know, for night after night after night in London, because that's what happened sort of in the last couple of rebellion phases, being dragged around and shouted at by the police night after night after night. I couldn't bear that level of discomfort. I was only on the plane for an hour, you know. So I think the point is, we need to be a diverse movement. We need to be innovative. We need to think outside the box, and we need to honor one another and our differences and our values, and respect everybody's contributions. So I consider my contribution, if you like, in terms of climbing on the plane, to have been relatively small. But if we add up all of our contributions, we all do what we can to be brave and imaginative and creative and innovative for the future, then, you know, we might just make a difference.
Oh, thank you, James. And I think it required a great deal of bravery, actually. I can't imagine that I could have done that without shaking so much I'd fall off. So, Todd and James, maybe we can have a conversation about this. James mentioned there about what we can all individually do, and do we need to take that holiday and things like that. But is it fair to blame the individual holiday maker for buying a £14.99 flight to Milan when taking the train to Bath is more expensive, you know? So
it's just absurd.
I wish to discuss around that is that the majority of airlines' revenue, up to 75% of airlines' revenue, actually comes from the biggest corporate flyers who are pursuing their business activities to profit their shareholders. It looks like at the expense of possibly everyone else. So what's your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd, really. Like, as James said, 1% of the population creates 50% of the demand, and not only that, like, if we look at the people, over 80% of the world's people that have never even stepped foot on an aircraft, disproportionately, they're going to be people that are being affected most by droughts, famine, and potential wars breaking out, you know, as a result of all this. So, yeah, I think, like, ultimately, because of the injustice of you know, the few people that are ruining it for everyone else, business travelers, academics as well, going off to lectures around the world. Like, it's so ingrained in our culture, we just turn up and book our ticket and get on a flight without a second thought, complaining because it's five minutes late. And yeah, you're right, the fact that it's cheaper than a rail ticket is just criminal. And the fact that frequent flyers are currently rewarded for that behavior in a climate and ecological emergency, I mean, it's just, yeah. So, I mean, what can I say? I would say there's a recent paper that's been published by an NGO called Stay Grounded. We'll try and put a link in the description. It's called the Just Transition Discussion, and one of the levers in that paper discusses like carbon pricing and a frequent flyer tax levy. So you know, it's not really when actually 50% of the UK population don't fly at all each year. So you know, the people that are saving up their hard-earned cash to go on a flight, you know, to Benidorm, of course we'd rather them take the train, but they're not really the main target when we look at, you know, the people that are causing most harm. So yeah, I think levers like the frequent flyer tax levy, and you know, right now aviation's the worst it's ever been since it started. The industry is on its knees. There's always kind of policies where BA, for example, are firing and then rehiring their employees on worse contracts, whilst the government is bailing out these airlines with our money. And ultimately it's a business which is set to fail. You know, the airlines at best case won't recover till 2019 levels until 2024, and most likely till 2026. We can't allow that to happen. We need to recognize where we are at, and at the end of the day, the fact that net zero in the government's rhetoric around 2050, net doesn't include international aviation and shipping. So there's not one single country in the world which actually accounts for international aviation emissions. Everyone's just washed their hands of them. So clearly a lot needs to change in policies. COP26 in the run-up, you know, is hopefully an ideal opportunity. I know Caroline Lucas is doing a lot of work with the Climate and Ecological Emergency Bill, and as part of that bill, that would allow governments, or our government at least, to include international aviation and shipping emissions into the calculations. And yeah, you mentioned earlier like the non-CO2 effects of aviation. They're not even considered at the moment, and they are 3 times more heating than CO2 alone. So yeah, due to contrails and nitrous oxide and whatnot. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah.
James, do you have anything to say about whether you could blame the holidaymaker? And it is pointed out a lot of the time that holidaymakers actually create jobs in other countries where they go on holiday as well. So is it fair to blame the individual rather than the corporates here?
On the question of creation of jobs, the point is we can actually create jobs in other ways too. And it needs to be brave and innovative there. So if we were to look at a programme to insulate the entire housing stock of the UK, that would create a heck of a lot of jobs. I would imagine many more than tourism. We can also create a lot more jobs here in the UK for home-based tourism, staycation, whatever you want to call it. So, you know, jobs follow on from strategic decisions that we make to do something. So if we were to make a strategic decision that said, okay, I'm actually a bit horrified to learn from Todd just now that, you know, the emissions from aviation aren't included in any country's count of emissions. Or that's just appalling.
That's
so
why
no
we're here.
Yeah, no wonder. You know, no wonder that this isn't really being tackled, because actually the truth isn't really being told. So yeah, I mean, when it comes to the arguments about, you know, aviation creating jobs, well, the lack of aviation could also create jobs. You know, jobs happen as a result of decisions that we take to follow a particular path and take a particular strategy. If our strategy was, let's get to net zero by 2025, as per the second demand of XR, that would create huge amounts of employment here in the UK and in other countries as well. So, you know, it's not really a strong argument. Those jobs are simply a byproduct of our decision that we must travel by plane. We can take a different decision, which will have a different byproduct of different kinds of jobs, and they can be green jobs.
Thank you. Yes, and I think there's a lot of appetite for improving holiday facilities around the UK at the moment, so that's a good thing. Rod, what do you say to the argument that it creates jobs abroad, for example, in the Caribbean, where people rely on the income from holiday resorts?
Well, what I would say to that is the Caribbean Prime Minister has recently said at an international convention that high emitting countries around the world should be charged with ecocide because they're committing crimes against humanity because of these low-lying island nations.
I think it was climate genocide.
Climate genocide.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, you know, there's a little bit of a contradiction there and almost a conflict of interest, because on the one hand, the island nations are saying they need the tourists, which they'll get via high carbon travel, but at the same time, you know, that's the single worst thing that we can do really as humans to emit CO2. So I think there's this big narrative that's pushed by the global north that countries, developing countries and countries in the global south, like need our tourism to have a successful economy. But really, when we just focus on a local economy and you know, tourism's taken out of the equation, then you know, we can actually the countries will adapt, I believe, in no time, and ultimately what's more important, having an island or not, really. So yeah, and then like on the jobs question abroad, I think, you know, part of this conversation around equity and carbon budget, you know, we started the Industrial Revolution. We need to play our role as a wealthy nation in helping these countries survive. And yeah, and in the UK, like the paper I was talking about, the Just Transition paper, it would bring in that element of effect, like helping tourists dependent areas in the world. And yeah, on our own soil, it would be a case of, like, you know, if you're willing to transition into a lower carbon sector, then you should be re-educated and supported by the government, instead of the shareholders and the board getting bailed out. Then let's bail out the people and you know, put that money to good use instead of investing it in a failed business. Let's help the people get into these new green jobs and thrive. And as we know, like when we take these actions, then everything gets better. Our well-being can be improved, and you know, we're out connecting with nature, and we're doing something that's meaningful and purpose. You know, gives us purpose. What can be better than that when we know where, you know, we need to do this for our children ultimately?
Absolutely agree. And some low-lying island nations where people like to go on holiday will be the first to suffer anyway. So she was right about the climate genocide.
James, did you have a point there?
Yeah, I was just listening to what you were both saying there, and you know, the concept of shifting baseline syndrome is shouting up in my head right now. George Monbiot talks about it quite a bit. It's what are we actually comparing with? So if we talk now about jobs in island nations that are tourism related, those are relatively new jobs. You know, the aviation industry, international travel is relatively new on the grand scale of things. It's just a blink of an eye. You know, as a species, we survived and thrived perfectly well without flying for tens of thousands of years. We can't now suddenly say, oh, because we've now decided that we're going to develop an aviation industry, oh my God, suddenly all of those countries are completely dependent on our tourist dollars and stuff. Nonsense. I mean, we could just move the baseline a little bit further back and say, let's not compare it with 2018. Let's compare it with 1818, you know, or 1918, whatever. You know, it's like, what do you compare with? Where do you start? And I would assert that there is no country in the world whose development and whose prosperity and well-being can be attributed to aviation.
Yeah, and I think we should. Everyone should think about whether they need to fly or not. But I think we should start first also with businesses who are just there to profit their shareholders, and they should possibly think about new ways to do business, especially in the light of our recent grounding anyway, I think it's very, very possible to totally keep that shift in place here, so that expansion won't be necessary. The next point that's sprung into my mind, it leaps there and dances around constantly, is that airport expansion, the narrative is that we are creating supply to keep up with increased demand. However, in transport, as in roads, that's the wrong way round. What's actually happening is largely the airport expansions are owned by companies that wish to profit from the airport expansion. So in road building and in aviation, actually supply is supply that increases demand. So these companies are aggressively pursuing expansion in the UK, and are giving us a false narrative, really. When, for example, Bristol Airport's the first one going through at the moment, it's already been rejected at local level and it's now gone to government level. And that's driven by the wish of that's owned by an investment fund called the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, who operates to profit. Is the Teachers of Ontario in Canada. But they get a very good return on their investment. But what a lot of people don't realise is that it is just a money-making enterprise. It's not supply and demand related. It's trying to artificially inflate demand, so that its profit, and its profit doesn't come from the airlines. It comes from increased car parking facilities and sundry sales. So there's a very, very false narrative being spun here around airport expansion and investments. Many people don't realise that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's totally unnecessary to expand in order to increase demand. I mean, it's just ridiculous in my view.
Can I give another example that's similar to that, Alice? My understanding is that the business case for HS2, for example, has been their financial forecasts are based on an estimate of running 18 services an hour between London and Birmingham. Now, there is no other high-speed train line in the world that manages to schedule more than 12 services an hour. Obviously, you have to be very careful with how many trains you put on a track at any one time, and the faster they go, the more careful you have to be. So nowhere else in the world has done more than 12 an hour. HS2 have based their business case on 18 an hour, right? And the current operator on that line has just reduced the number of services per hour from 3 to 2. Right, so there's a really good case, a really good example to illustrate your point there, Alice, about, it's just about creating the supply, investing in the supply, and then hopefully the demand will come. Now, I think anybody who's got their head screwed on will realise that demand for 18 services an hour will not come, especially because of the way we've changed how we work. But I mean, to go from 3 to 18, like, there's no way that that's ever going to happen. So their business case is fundamentally flawed, and that's even before you even start on their the fact that HS2 won't be carbon neutral for at least 120 years. So they're very similar, aren't they? And HS2 is predominantly being established to connect airports. So
absolutely.
The business case for HS2 is so that airports can expand. That's the reason behind it, which absolutely is so ridiculous.
Ultimately it's dependent on the Heathrow expansion going ahead to be an airport shuttle service, which is going to save like 20 minutes. And we managed to speak to the Heathrow CEO on a forum the other day and expose some of his greenwashing tactics. We're seeing the same thing time and time again from the industry, lies led to the customers and even the employees. Most pilots don't understand how damaging aviation is. They believe it's only 2% of the global problem. It's actually 6%. And there simply is no green alternatives for many decades. Hydrogen is a long way off, and battery technology will just never cut anything more than a short haul flight. So I think going back to like this role as kind of Sky Rebellion, hopefully we've got a Rolls-Royce engineer as well on our team, and we can kind of like just call out this greenwashing and tell it how it is. You know, it's our number one demand, isn't it? We need to inform.
That's exactly it. Yes.
Tell people the truth.
And then let our decisions go from there when people have actually really evaluated the situation and tried to do things in a different way. Quite right. Have you got any other inspirational points on that spring to mind at the moment?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Could I jump in there for a minute? I think I have. I think that once one becomes aware of the harmful effects of flying, once one becomes aware of the injustice of it, and assuming that you're not okay with that injustice, because some people sadly are. So assuming that you're aware of the effects, that you understand how unjust this is, how impossible it actually is to make flying zero carbon, and look at the intentions of the industry to expand so hugely just for the sake of profit in a crisis, in a climate and ecological crisis. I think the next question is going to be, what can I do about that? You know, and we've already talked a little bit about that, but I'm keen to just share, I guess, my sense that we have to tackle this directly. You know, we've had years and years of writing to our MPs, signing petitions, going on marches. You know, it actually doesn't work, and nobody will claim that it does. There's no evidence that it does, but there is evidence that direct action works. So I would invite. In fact, I would say we don't just have. I would say we have a duty to take direct action. We have a duty to our younger generations and those that come after. We have a duty to our fellow humans in the global south. Direct action is the only way we're going to make any difference here. And that can take many, many forms. It doesn't have to take the form of climbing on top of a plane. You know, there's so many things one can do, but I would urge anybody who is inspired to take action to really ask themselves the question, is there evidence behind my choice? Is there evidence that supports my choice of action? And there is a lot of evidence that direct action can be effective. It's not always, but it is the best way to create, you know, significant change in our society at the speed and the scale that we require. So that's kind of my plea to anybody watching.
I agree.
Find your thing, you know, like I was saying earlier. It may not be climbing on a plane, it may not be sleeping in the streets in the rain and being dragged around by the police in the middle of the night, but you know, even if it's dropping a banner, even if it's getting something in your local paper, even if it's, you know, do something that has some chance of making some impact. And I know that we can't be attached to outcomes specifically, but there are certain things that we can do that have been demonstrated to be more effective than others. So choose the things that you know might work rather than the ones that you know won't work.
I think you're so right, and I think it's very important that everyone does everything they can do to galvanise people on this issue and present a united front, and just get the facts out about what the industry is all about, what the expansion is all about, and the absolute negligent lack of joined up thinking on this matter, the lack of taxation, the lack of counting of emissions. I think once people took into account all the factors associated with this industry, they're still obviously free to make their own choices, but I think their choices would probably be different.
Yeah, just to add, like on the expansion, like if we allow the industry to continue with their forecast growth, they're going to triple their emissions. Their real-time emissions will triple by 2050 when every other sector has to decarbonize.
And we still won't be counting it, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, they've got this scheme called Corsair, which is an offsetting scandal. It prices, you know, carbon at like $1 per ton or something ridiculous, when it's more like $1,000 per ton. and actually before COVID, we were flying 4 billion passengers per year, and they forecast to be flying 8 billion passengers by 2037. Obviously,
God.
that delayed a bit due to the COVID recovery, but that's more than all the people we have on this planet. You know, so yeah, I completely agree with what James is saying. You know, we'll need to do whatever we can to get this message out, and yeah. Thank you, James, for you know, helping be such an inspiration.
Yes,
Well,
and thank you both for being here today. It's been lovely to have you both.
And thank you,
Two
Alex,
inspirational people.
and thank you for all the hard work, you know, putting all the energy into this New Sky Rebellion project. Really looking forward to it.
Totally agree. And Todd, thank you to you. Love you, and I'm so grateful for your bravery, and it's just an example, a really incredible example to all of us. And thank you, and yeah, you're a star.
All right, guys, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, see you all. Cheers.